Sandra Scott, Sandra Scott. My relationship to the Sunrise neighborhood is I was born and raised there, and my family has actually been there since about 1917. I live in the house that my grandfather built in 1920. My grandfather came from Russia to the United States in about 1900, originally settled in Nebraska, and then came here, I think due to health reasons. They said this was more like where he lived in Russia. So they moved here and lived here in about 1917. I don't know the exact date they got here, and then their last child was born here in 1918. They settled, of course, on the east side, and that was oftentimes called Little Russia. And the Germans from Russia tend to settle there, so he felt at home there. Liked the weather, and he was a carpenter, so there was plenty of work here. So just stayed and raised his family and passed away here. My family was involved in agricultural work we used to have a huge beet industry here, sugar beets, hence the factory was built in, I think, about 1901. And of course, they recruited a lot of people. My grandfather didn't come here for the sugar factory. I believe it was health reasons. But anyway, he worked as a carpenter, and my uncles, I had 5 uncles and my mom, one little girl in that family, they would go out, and actually my grandfather would contract beets. What that would be, they would go out and they didn't plant the beets, but after they come up, they would go thin the beets, and then when the beets were harvested, then they would go and top the beets. Basically, topping the beets is picking the beet up, they'd put it on their knee, and then they chop that vegetation off, and then that would be thrown in a truck and go to the sugar factory. So that's how they were involved in the agricultural industry, but they never farmed on their own, so to speak. They stayed there for the remainder of their life. Both of my grandparents passed in that home in the old neighborhood. Just kind of, I call it around the block from my house, is I believe they call it St. Paul's Congregational or First Congregational Church. And then just a block north of that is St. John's. Did I say St. John's? Well, St. Paul's and St. John's were the 2 churches. There was another smaller church in the same vicinity by the park, but a lot revolved around the church. They would go to church on Sundays. In the afternoons, the women had, my mom would call it the Versammlung, but I believe it must be a German word. It was kind of an afternoon prayer meeting, kind of a Bible study for the German women. And many times at the church, too, it's kind of funny. I thought the men would sit on one side and the women would sit on another side. But a lot revolved around the church. They were very religious people. I still have my grandfather's religious books that are all in German. Well, the neighborhood, it was, old-fashioned. I grew up in the 50s. I was born in 1949, grew up in the 50s. It was, we didn't have the bypass, so it was a kind of a closed neighborhood where you could go right down to the factory. It was a simple life. We, played in the neighborhood, played in the park, walked down to the river and swam in the river, the Poudre River. It was a simpler time. We could go to the sugar factory and walk right in. And we knew a lot of people. My uncle worked there. So they would page him, and he would come down and buy us a malt. And, we didn't really take vacations. People sat on their front porches. People walked around the block. They'd visit. There wasn't I don't think there was a lot of money to, take trips and things. They might go, there's a lot of interaction between Greeley and Fort Morgan, the Germans that lived there, or they'd go back to Nebraska, from Lincoln is where my parents were, or my grandparents were. So, we'd play in the neighborhood, play in the park. You could do all that then. Mm-hmm. You could do all that then. Ride our bikes up and down the street. If we had a bike, a lot didn't have it, so we'd have to share. We had the old clip-on roller skates. And we used to go to the church, to the St. Paul's, they had cemented everything, so it was like a skating rink. So we'd go there and skate. But on Sunday afternoons, they would tell us not to skate because we were too loud when they were having their prayer meeting. So, so we'd have to skate somewhere else or play somewhere else. But you could just play throughout the neighborhood. One of our favorite things was to go, there was this Bright's Fish Market that was right there on 4th Avenue. And we'd go in there to get candy. Mrs. Bright, they were, I believe, Japanese. And they're, you know, it's kind of, that whole area is a melting pot. Everybody that came here that didn't have money would settle on the east side. But anyway, we go over there because they'd have like octopus in there, because he was a fishmonger. And they were wonderful people. And he'd have big tuna in there. And of course, we'd go around and look at all that. My mom was so funny, though. She wouldn't buy anything over there because she said everything smelled like fish. But Mrs. Bright she always had free candy for us, but then we'd always buy, they had Orangette and Grapette for a nickel. So we'd buy, that was a big treat. So we'd get that and enjoy that.
Were there any community-based activities, like festivals or just gatherings that the whole community would partake in, or?
Not necessarily that I remember. I'm trying to think. I know sometimes the churches would celebrate May Day. I know one church did. They'd have a pole, and then they'd have ribbons hanging down from the pole, and they'd walk around the pole and do that. But I can't think of any. Now I know they'd have church holidays where people'd come from all over. We'd have people stay at the house. This is before I was ever born, but they'd stay there, and then they'd have church conventions, I guess is what you'd say. That was probably the biggest thing. I don't remember them really taking part in, say, with a stampede. It was the rodeo then, of course, but no real events that I can think of.
Okay, so then. What do you remember the neighborhood being like when you were younger?
It was a wonderful neighborhood. I still think it is. That's why I moved there. It, of course, I said mostly Germans from Russia, a lot of Latinos, Hispanic. I don't know the exact term you want to use there. We had George Osborne and his family. They're originally from Deerfield, and when Deerfield failed, they came here. He was a very important part of our family as well. That's where I learned my acceptance of everyone. George would come to our house and he would just stand outside, and my mom would say, "No, come in, have a cup of coffee." And of course, I was probably about 4 or 5. I had never seen a black person before. And so I was curious. I looked at him, but I just kind of stood there, and my mom brought me over and says, "You need to meet George." And so he held out his hand, and I shook his hand, and I adored him. He used to pick up grass and things from the neighborhood. He had a wagon and a horse. And that wouldn't happen today. All the kids in the neighborhood, I'd run in, I'd say, "Mom, I'm going to go with George. He's picking up grass." Fine. We'd go get in the wagon, and we'd go all over the east side, but we'd also go to other areas. And George always brought us back, and the neighborhood was very pristine. Everybody was grateful to have the property. Most of the properties were owned and not rented. Even if they didn't have grass, they would sweep the dirt. Very clean. Most everybody had gardens. A lot of people still had outhouses, but they were always cleaned. They burned trash. Those are the old days when we burned trash. And so that was kind of messy. You had to clean out your own ash pit. There was no trash service. The alleys were even cleaned by the folks. The folks that lived there, they'd make sure the weeds were down in the alleys. And they were so grateful, I think, to have what they had and to be there, and the church and the family. Everything revolved around the family. The family, like with my family, the boys would be at home, and then they would contribute to the financial needs of the house. And then, of course, as they married and moved on, that changed. But very, very family-oriented. People sat out on their porches, and a lot of German spoken. My mom spoke. I know some, but I'm not very good at it. But It was just, I felt it was a very safe neighborhood. You could, even at nights, walk around. It was just a good place to grow up, I thought. I really enjoyed it. Well, I can tell you the changes kind of, as I grew up in the 50s. In the 60s, you know, there was a lot of unrest in the country, Vietnam War, you know, just a lot of things, the whole flower children era. So you could kind of see it changing then. I got married young, and I moved out of the neighborhood then, but my folks were still there, so I was there all the time. In the 70s, it was still pretty, you know, pretty good. A lot of the older people were still there. Some were passing on, and then, of course, their children didn't want to live there. They had moved, you know, to different places, and so the houses were sold. And so in the 80s, you saw changes where properties would go downhill, grow up in weeds. Not the most pristine neighborhood. It was a poor neighborhood. More rentals, of course, so people came in. More crime. Kind of just, well, we could go to the park. There's a large park there. We just called it the East Side Park. I believe now it's Archibald Park. Anyway, we could go over there at night, and all the kids would play together, and there'd be older kids there. My mom did not like that, though. She come and got me, and she'd switch my legs. She didn't want me at the park at night. But then it was safe. This was in the 50s. It was safe. And then it got, as some neighborhoods do, I don't know, it went downhill, but it didn't become like a ghetto. Mm-hmm. You know, the properties, not all of them were as well taken care of. I pretty much on my street, I live on 13th Street between 4th and 5th Avenue. That stayed pretty good. And many of the areas did, but some faltered, but not that big of change. But we did get, you know, petty crimes, you know, break-ins and, you know, ugly stuff, stabbings, things like that. In the late 80s and maybe even the early 90s. My mom and dad stayed in the neighborhood. My mom was never afraid. She talked to everybody. You know, whether they spoke English or not, she talked to them. That's just the kind of lady she was. And they were very good to her. She'd ask them what they were barbecuing, and they couldn't, you know, really converse. But they'd invite her, and they'd feed her, and she was hilarious. But anyway, and so I was down there a lot, and I could see things. Not much had happened. We still had a lot of places that didn't have sidewalks. We still had dirt roads. We still had some things. Like, I would kind of say the East Side got ignored. We didn't have a huge police presence either. We used to laugh and say, if you see a policeman on this side, he's new and lost, or he doesn't want to come down here. And I know when you report something, then they come and they say, "Why do you live here?" I say, "Because this is where I live, and I want to be here." But then in the early 2000s, both my parents passed within a year of each other, and the house came to me. And I had a lot of people say, "You need to sell that house. You need to move out of there. That's a bad area." I said, "Listen, I grew up in that area when it was wonderful. It was pristine. There were good people here, and there are still good people here. And you don't affect change in a community by moving. You affect change by staying there and showing what you're doing." And it's worked. I see that neighborhood really, I'm almost afraid of almost gentrification in a way. Houses are selling for a lot more because they're affordable, you know, as opposed to some of the other areas. But I see people fixing up properties, and things are gradually made a turn. The city, I don't know, had some new funding or money. See sidewalks go in, improvements go in, streets paved that hadn't been paved in years. And I see it, I don't want to say coming back, because it's a whole new era. And there's still, but I think most of the houses down there are owned. There's some rentals, but I think the neighborhood is pretty stable now. A lot less crime, or I'm not aware of it. Now, I mean, I'm not going to leave my house at night and walk around. But because, not necessarily from people there in the Sunrise area, but, other criminal elements that, wander around. I know my garage is on the alley, and when I come home at night, I do have a garage door opener, but it's about 50 feet to my house. I'm never afraid. And there's a lot of good people in that neighborhood, a lot of good people. The Morenos, wonderful people, have been down there, known them forever. They used to live right behind us. And then they moved, but they kept their store. And that place just does gangbusters. They have good food. But yeah, so I think it's gone from very pristine to troubled to coming back. One of my favorite memories, my grandfather I dearly loved. And he spoke fluent English, Russian, and German. Anyway, he was always doing stuff, always busy. Well, we had what we called the barn on the back of our property. It was like a barn. And Grandpa, that was his workshop. Well, he went in there one day, my mom and I were in the yard, and he was going to fix the chimney, I think, of the stovepipe. He heated that with a wood-burning stove. And we heard a commotion, like something fell or something like that. Well, Grandpa came out of the garage. His whole face was black. He had his glasses on his head, so he sort of looked like blackface, the old things. It was hilarious. I mean, we laughed and laughed. I remember that was funny. There's another good story that I remember. My grandpa, he would cook kraut in what are those pots a pressure cooker on the stove. We had an old coal stove downstairs. And so he'd cook that on there. Well, it blew up. We heard it upstairs. It blew up. We went downstairs. Grandpa's covered in kraut. He had a couple of kitties. They're covered in kraut. Everything is covered in kraut. And we laughed a lot. Even Grandpa laughed. There's a lot of good memories down there. I went to school down there. I remember the plays. We'd be in plays. We'd always have plays. And even the older German folks would come to the schools for the plays, even though they had no one there. They seemed to enjoy the kids. And living right across from the school, I always enjoyed it when it was a grade school. The sound of children playing and laughing. And of course, when they changed it, I know the folks marched around there to save that school, but now it was an alternative high school, and now it's back to I think a middle school. But joyous, it was just a joyful time, going over to the park to play. Your friends lived right there. You knew your neighbors. You could, we walked to school, walked home from school. It was just, we loved the trains. The trains went right through there. That was always fun, especially when the old steam trains would come through. That was amazing. We loved that. And I can interject just a little bit here. This was before my time. They used to have circus trains come. And they would stop along the railroad tracks there, because where Jefferson School is now, that was just a huge, they called it the showgrounds, because they'd have circuses there. And they'd unload their elephants, and they'd unload all their stuff. And then the young men in the neighborhood would go help set up the tents. And many times then they would get tickets to the show or something. And my uncle told me this story. He went over there just to see what was going on. Well, they had I think it was a mule, and they didn't have a zebra, so they were painting stripes on the mule so they could have, more of a circus atmosphere. And then one evening there was an awful storm, and the elephants broke loose and ran north across 13th Street. Didn't come through our property, but knocked fences down and stuff because of the storm, I think, frightened them. But they got all rounded up, and everything was okay, and people, put things back together. But it was just a great time, just a great time. I so enjoyed my childhood very much. My house. It's it's on the city register. It's also a state historic site. The former little grocery stores like like Bright's Fish Market's now a house. The other those little grocery stores, the park, definitely the park. Used to have a big cement gazebo in the middle, and that, at Sunrise. The sugar factory. Oh, when the sugar factory was there, it was amazing. I hated to see it go down, but there you go. Progress. A lot of the ice house, the old ice house. Many, along the railroad tracks, there were many businesses. So you'd see those businesses, and, this is the east side. Of course, the railroad tracks. That's the dividing, you're going east, we're in Sunrise. Yeah. Let's see, what other buildings? Of course, the river's an important part of it. Used to flood. Oh, gosh. Not up to us, but it used to flood a lot. It still does sometimes. Let's see. It's just the small houses. They're smaller, maybe 2 bedrooms. Not very big. A lot of them were built real similar. That's east side. That's east, not big mansions. Smaller homes. There was... right next to me, there was a large, it was P.L. Hudson. He sold furniture. And before the 2 houses were there, they had buggies out there, and they sold buggies. But that building, it's kind of iconic because it's still there. It's apartments now. But and my mom, because his name was P.L. Hudson, they called him Paper Leg Hudson. I said, well, that wasn't very nice. But and the streets, they're wide. There's lots of trees, or were lots of trees. Oh, gosh, just so many things. This is the east side. This is the working class community. This is blue collar. These are good people. Be you Asian, Hispanic, German, Irish, whatever your, ethnic group is. This is the east side. It was very much a melting pot, very much. And that's what I remember. I grew up with Hispanics. I grew up with not a lot of black children, but some black children. So it just was this is okay. And then you learn all those ugly things later.
Mm-hmm. Are there any buildings that you can think of that have been torn down that you wish could be brought back? That really kind of...
Down there, not a lot has been torn down. Well, I can say the school district, the old school building, they kept the one, which is ABC Child Care Center, early education, and there were 2 other buildings there that were torn down that were part of the school. They weren't as nice as the building they retained, but I think they could have retained I called it the kindergarten building. It was right in the center. It was all brick, and I really feel it could have been restored, I think, or something done with that. I'm trying to think, not a lot's been torn down there.
That's good.
Really, that I can think. Oh, of course, well, I have to say, when they tore down the sugar factory, that was a big deal. It was a big part of the community. They would call it the campaign, and I remember this as a child. When they would, the campaign started in October. They'd start digging the beets. They'd bring them in, and the men, many people didn't have cars, but they would walk down to the sugar factory. So you'd see them carrying their lunch buckets, and they would walk by the house, go into the sugar factory, and working. And we didn't have 911 then. So if there was a problem at the factory, they had this huge siren whistle they would blow. If something happened, they needed help. And they would also blow that on New Year's Eve. And it was really wonderful. We'd go outside, and they'd blow that whistle, and it had windows that just opened up, and all the fellows that were working there would come to the windows and yell, "Happy New Year." You could hear it all over. So that was a really iconic building that left us. That was part of the neighborhood before the highway went in. That was part of the neighborhood. We always considered that part of the neighborhood. So, because we could just walk down there, and we go down the river, and we do all those things. I can't think of any other buildings that At least not in my little area there. Very few houses were torn down. Mostly they would go in and renovate them, so that's, I think, a good thing. It's kept the character of that area because they haven't leveled everything and, put in new houses or new things, so I hope to keep it the way it is. Oh, I know a lot of things about that.
Yeah, can we hear?
Oh, certainly. All about my house now.
Yes.
When my grandfather came here, they had to rent initially, of course, and they just rented a little east of where my house is now. And my grandpa, he was looking for land, looking for something. He couldn't find anything that was empty. So there was a house on the lot, just a single story, owned by John Lauk. And so my grandpa, I think he wanted to buy it, or my grandpa offered to buy it. And so he bought that house, had it hauled off. They, I don't know if they had trucks in, but it's actually part of that old house is out on First Avenue. So I know my mama showed me, and I think I remember where it is. But anyway, so then Grandpa got that property, and horses dug out the basement with, it's sort of like a plow thing, and they pull it up. They have a sort of a ramp, and then they pull that dirt up and pull that dirt up. And then Grandpa set all of the forms for the basement, and all the cement was poured by hand, mixing in a wheelbarrow. All of it was done that way. And it's got pretty good foundation. I bet it's at least that thick. I think Grandpa wanted to make sure it was solid. And my mom, she was about 4 or 5 years old. She watched the horses dig out the basement and do all that. She's the one that related that to me. And anyway, then Grandpa got the basement set, made it livable, and put kind of a temporary floor roof on there, so the family wouldn't have to rent anymore, and those funds then could be used to build the rest of the house. So then they moved out of the rental, moved into the basement. I think most of the boys were home, so there was probably 8 of them. It's a pretty good sized basement, but still, kind of confined. But in my grandma, there was a coal stove, and they had a coal furnace. And I don't know if the furnace, I think it was in there, but it wasn't operating yet because that heats the upstairs. And coal room, big, huge pantry. And then Grandpa would go out and work during the day, and my grandma, a lot of times, she would take the boys or the kids, the younger kids, out, and they'd go work the beet fields. And then my grandpa would come home at night until it got dark and work on the upper part of the house, mostly by himself, mostly working by himself. Hand saws, screwdrivers, no power tools, And he would work part-time. There was a planing company where they could plane boards to make them smooth. He worked there so he could do some of his work there to make, like for trim work in the house. And so he took out his building permit September 1st, 1919, and I think the house was finished about 22, 23, just gradually, if you can only work on it. And then he'd work on it on Saturday. He usually would have Saturday off, but Sunday was church day, family day. No work was done on Sunday. And it's a craftsman style, of course. It's got that big front porch. Now, originally that front porch was not, it's glassed in on one side and screened in on the other side. It was open. But my grandmother became very ill in the 30s, and so Grandpa glassed in one side for her, and then he went ahead and screened in the other side. But so she could sit out there and not be bothered by bugs or whatever. And it was, if you close the door, it can be warm in there, so it was nice for her to sit in there. And then as you go in the house, of course, there's the front room, and next to the front room is a parlor, and then a dining room, kitchen. And of course the full basement downstairs, and then upstairs. Everybody thinks it's got 20 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, but they're big bedrooms, big closets. And my closet is, I think it's 4 by 8, big closet, big walk-in closet. I got dressers in there and everything. All wood floors, all Douglas fir. When my grandfather, I have his, I don't know what they call that. It's a real estate thing, all the stuff that was ever, he bought $3,000 worth of Douglas fir lumber and the different things that went against the house. Anyway, so it's all dark woodwork. None of it's ever been changed. The doors still work, the windows work. I have had them, they were double hung windows, where that goes up and this can come down. Well, some of them would drop, and I didn't use the double hung portion, so I had them blocked by a historic craftsman, so it would look right. And the house has just really held up very, very well. We always had Grandpa did not have an outdoor toilet. We had a bathroom in the basement and a bathroom on the upper level on the second floor for the bedrooms. And let's see, what else? Oh, there was, there was coal and wood burning stoves in there to cook on. And then, of course, as things changed, that went out. I so wish I still had the one in the basement, though. That would be so nice. I could eat the whole house. Yeah. But it's just, it's 105 years old. It's just it's a beautiful old house. All that's ever lived there's family. And I'm the last that I know of. I haven't had any family members say they're interested. And I didn't have any children. So who knows? But as long as I'm around, it will be taken care of. And hopefully can, maintain it. But I know, it's gone through many configurations where my mom would have, she had wall-to-wall carpeting. And, in a way it was nice, really saved those floors. Because when I tore that all out, those floors just needed a little bit of sanding, and we did polyurethane rather than varnish. Back in the old days, they used varnish on everything. And it's good. I mean, it's great, but it's a little difficult to work with. And I know the house has all been rewired, replumbed. My husband, he was still alive, he was an electrician, and he was the type of electrician that wouldn't bang out walls to put in new wire. He'd fish everything through, so it still has the lath and plaster. Most all the rooms are still lath and plaster. I have many of the original fixtures, at least in the front room and the dining room. Light fixtures. I had all the plumbing redone because I felt, nothing been done in 80 years when I moved down there. And, they use that old galvanized stuff and, anyway. And I know in the bathroom, upstairs, we had to tear up the whole floor and redo all that. But then we sanded every single board and put it all back down. So, I'm very proud of that house. Proud of it more so for my grandfather, and that's why I went ahead and pursued the designations, the historic designations for it, because many times he was a craftsman, carpenter, built things, but they're not recognized. They recognize the mayors, the judges, but he was a wonderful man and should be recognized for the beautiful home he built. So that's why I did that, and I think it's still a beautiful home. Because we had a coal furnace in the house, we had a coal room. So the coal room was in the corner of the house. The coal truck would come back in, and they'd shovel coal into the coal room. And we'd usually get 2 tons a year, so 1,000, and then when that was used, we'd get another 1,000. And you'd have to actually shovel it into the furnace. And then Grandpa bought and had installed a hopper. I don't know if you're familiar with a hopper. Basically, you fill the hopper, and then as the furnace requires more coal, it'll push it in there. Yeah. And a lot of people don't know that. And then Grandpa thought that was perfect. So he wouldn't change anything. And then after he passed, my mom went ahead and put in a forced air gas furnace. Felt it was safer because there was a time, when coal will just, kind of smolder and catch on fire. Yeah. Well, Grandpa noticed that, and he got my dad, and they shoveled coal all over the basement, opened all the windows so it would cool down. Didn't want to lose it, didn't shovel it outside because, you're losing. I don't know how much the coal cost them. They buy it right over here. I think this is Cameron. I don't know what it was before, but anyway, and then they shoveled it all back in. Mom said, that was a lovely cleaning job. Coal dust everywhere. And I just remember as a child, you could walk anywhere. The neighborhood was pristine but humble. Good people. All the old German ladies would say hello to you. And sometimes they always had candy. And and they would scold you too, if, they kind of raised the kids in the neighborhood. And I remember, I think it was so lovely, because as a kid I would sit on the porches with my mom, and my mom spoke German. So they would speak in German, and I didn't understand anything, but they'd laugh, so I'd laugh with them. It was just, it was the best childhood I think anybody could ever have. I absolutely adored it. Like people say, oh, I'd never go back to my childhood. I said, oh, I would in a heartbeat. It was wonderful. We didn't have swimming pools or anything. There was a swimming pool out here, but we'd run through the hose in the summer. Everybody on one side watered at one time, so we could, run through the hose, and that was our swimming pool. And another wonderful thing, everybody hung their clothes out on a clothesline. Most of them had the old wringer washers. This is a great story. My grandpa went downtown. He liked new stuff. And so he come downtown. Here's Kaler's Appliance. They had the first automatic washer and dryer in there from Maytag. This was in the 50s. And so Grandpa bought it. I'm sure it was a fortune. And he had it delivered. They come to deliver it, and my mom says, oh, no, we didn't buy that. And the fellow that was delivering, he said, it says on here Conrad Borgen's, my grandpa. And my mom said, so they brought it in. And of course, everything had it. We had to have a 220 for the dryer. We had to have all that put in, a special stuff for the washing machine, and then this, and so that, everybody was curious about what's going on in the neighborhood. Why is Kaler's Appliance over there? What's going on? So all the old ladies would come over there and see. They had to see it. This is hilarious. My mom almost was doing demos for Maytag. They should have paid her. They went to come see it. So she said, well, come over. I'm going to do laundry on Saturday. Come over. So she put seats out, chairs downstairs. They were sitting downstairs. She served tea and coffee and then whatever cakes or things she had. And they watched and they had to come over and see the washing machine, how that went in there, and how that, does that clean that? Does that really clean that? And then they had to look at it when it come out of the washing machine to be sure that, and it's almost like dry, because, it's been dry. And then Mom says, then you just take this and put it in the dryer. And they're like, well, how does that work? Mom says, well, that drum spins around and tosses the stuff around, and then the hot air comes in and dries it. So, of course, they'd stay through that whole cycle, And then they had, and it's fluffy. Because, if you hang a towel outside, it gets kind of like, not so nice. Oh, it was hilarious. It was hilarious. And my grandpa would be like, are they going to come over every Saturday? Mom said, I don't think so. I don't think they will. But it was fascinating for him. Because, at a store, usually in that day and age, they didn't have a setup where you could watch appliances or anything like that. They, just told you about all the great things. And another wonderful story, kind of along the same line. This gentleman shows up one night and has a sewing machine, a Pfaff sewing machine. Mom said, I'm sorry, we did not buy that. You must have the wrong house. Conrad Borgen's? That's my dad. So he bought her a sewing machine, very nice sewing machine. And, of course, Grandpa had to come up and he had to see that. He had an old Singer in the basement, a pedal machine. He'd make everything on there. He made a canvas chair for outside. He'd sew all kinds of stuff on there. He'd patch his pants. He'd do everything on that old Singer pedal machine. Oh, I love that old thing. But yeah, and then he liked that. Oh, I guess one of my favorite memories, my grandpa bought me a piano. I was in the 3rd grade, and I all of a sudden became really excited about playing piano. I dingle on it at school and stuff like that, and then I started, taking some lessons, and my grandparents, not the grandparents, my grandpa over here at the house, but my Dorsey grandparents, my dad's grandparents or parents, they had a piano. So we would go to their house. We'd go over there with my uncle every night so I could practice. And so Grandpa said to my mom, where do you go every night? Where do you and Sandala? That was his name for me, Sandala. He always called me Sandala. Mom says, well, Sandy's learning how to play the piano, and so she doesn't have a way to practice, so we go over to John's folks, and she practices there. He said, you find her a piano, and I will buy it. So Mom found a piano. These people had, it's an old upright, it was in very good shape on 11th Avenue, and I think it was $200. And my grandpa gave Mom the money, and they went and bought it. And then we had an old 1950 Chevy pickup, which is actually a family member. My dad thought it was a family member. We had it forever. Anyway, they took that old 1950 Chevy pickup, go get the piano. It took 6 guys to get it on the truck. And then they backed up to the house, and it took 6 of them to get it in there. And then I remember when I sat down to play, my grandpa come up and he stood by the piano and he tapped on the piano and he'd sing. And that was wonderful. He just thought that was wonderful. And I remember that. I remember, too, he used to sit on the front porch. We had a wonderful rocking chair out there. And he'd sit there and he'd tap his hands and sing. And if he'd smoke a cigarette, he had one of those long cigarette holders, And then every now and then he'd take that out and put it back in and he'd sing. Those are wonderful times. But, yeah, when I think about one of my favorite memories was the piano. And Grandpa just buying stuff like that, He would just go get those things. It was wonderful. I really hope it doesn't get too gentrified. When housing prices get so expensive in other areas, people, and I'm happy for new people to move in, people that want to, fix up their houses, but I know, property taxes have gone up a lot down there, and there are many older families that they stayed on that side of town simply because, property taxes weren't so high. Now they're going up all the time. Property values are going up all the time. In a way, it's good, but it's bad for them because, sometimes if you're retired and then all of a sudden your property tax goes from $500 to $1,500, and I know they do have some property tax relief, but I don't feel it's sufficient. I feel that senior citizens shouldn't have to pay property tax. If they've lived in that house and taken care of that house, they own that property. Why do you have to tax it? I mean, I'll get on my high horse. But I'd like to see the neighborhood stay the way it is. I don't want to see new development in there. I like the humbleness of the neighborhood. I think people appreciate it. It's other than my 13th Street's busy because of the Leprinos, but it's a relatively quiet neighborhood. I see children at the park. I see people back to kind of like I was in the 50s and 60s, with strollers, pushing their kids, walking their dogs. A lot of good things are coming back, but I want us to stay that way. I don't want it to become, we're going to build, affordable housing, and they put up high-rise. That will destroy the community. It will destroy it. I like the small houses, the just regular folks, I think that makes for community. People live in these other neighborhoods, and I'm not putting down their neighborhoods, but a lot of them don't even know each other. Now, here, you work in the yard, neighbors talk to each other, you go by, and I make it a point. Everybody that comes by, I speak to. Hi, how are you? I don't care what color you are, how are you? Oh, and, more and more people speak, or as they come by and I see them more, they'll stop and talk. And that's what I want. I mean, maybe that's a pipe dream, but I just like that simple life, not, so fancy. Oh, look, they bought a new car. We got to go get a new car. My car's 20 years old. It works great. It's a 4Runner. Works great. And that's what I'd like to see for that area, to maintain the dignity that it's always had. And it's a simple community, to to don't let it, falter, to maintain what we've got and maybe spruce up a few things, but keep it the way it is. Keep it the way it is. Don't be afraid of sunrise. Just because we live on the other side of the track doesn't mean we're all villains. Come to Moreno's. Try Moreno's. Go to Murdoch's. Murdoch's has a lot of stuff. Come down, drive around the neighborhood, go to the park, have a picnic. There's trouble, but there's trouble everywhere in Greeley. Nothing is just perfect. But don't be afraid of the East Side. Come see the historic, not all of them are historic homes, but they're old homes, and how they were built, and families lived in them, and families are still living in them, so they must have built them pretty well, You see some neighborhoods and the houses are already falling apart, but I know it has its, don't go across the tracks. That's a bad place. No, we're just people. We live just like you do. And the more you know about us, the less you'll be afraid of us or afraid of our neighborhood. I guess that's all I have to say. We're good people. Come visit.